Her billionaire ex invited her to his birthday to flaunt his new wife, then she showed up as a self-made billionaire. The crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the marble foyer as Warren Ashcroft stood frozen, champagne glass trembling in his hand. His face had drained of all color. Before him stood the woman he'd abandoned 12 years ago, pregnant and broken. Except she wasn't broken anymore. Sloane Barrett looked at him with calm, devastating clarity. Warren's voice cracked. "I didn't think you'd come." Sloane smiled, the kind of smile that cuts clean through pretense. "Bethany was kind enough to invite me. It would have been rude to decline." His eyes moved to the two teenagers beside her. The boy, tall and broad-shouldered with Warren's jawline. The girl, sharp-eyed and elegant with both their features. His children, the ones he'd rejected before they were born. "These are," Warren started, unable to finish. "Your children," Sloane said simply. "Reed and Quinn." They wanted to see where their father lived. The word father landed like a stone in still water, ripples of shock spreading through the watching crowd. Warren stepped forward, desperation bleeding into his carefully maintained composure. "Sloane, please. I've wanted to reach out for years. I just didn't know how. I didn't know if I had the right." The 16-year-old boy, Reed, moved between them. His voice was steady, cold. "You didn't have the right. But you could have tried. You had 12 years. Warren's eyes glistened with tears he had no right to shed. "I made terrible mistakes. I know I hurt you. I know I hurt them." He looked at the twins, shame tightening his features. "I thought pushing you away would make all of us less miserable, but all it did was prove how weak I was." Quinn, the 14-year-old girl, tilted her head with the kind of perception that comes from growing up watching your mother survive what should have destroyed her. "You don't get to want things from us just because it's convenient now." Warren's new wife, Bethany, stepped forward, her smile brittle and sharp. "Now wait just a minute." Sloane's gaze cut to her with surgical precision. "I'd be very careful about what you say next." The room went completely silent. Sloane turned back to Warren. "You asked what I've been doing. I built Barrett Ventures from nothing. I raised two incredible children alone. I funded companies that are changing the world. I created something that matters." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, yet somehow everyone heard it. "And I did all of it without you." Warren's face crumpled. "I know. And I'm so sorry." Sloane shook her head slowly. "I don't need your apology. I needed it 12 years ago when I was in labor alone. I needed it when Reed took his first steps, and you weren't there to see it. I needed it when Quinn asked why her daddy didn't want her." Her voice never rose, never broke. Each word was a hammer striking truth into the silence. "I don't need it now," she continued, "because I learned something you never understood. My worth isn't determined by who stays. It's determined by what I build when everyone leaves. Now, if you want to know how a woman goes from abandoned and pregnant to standing in her ex-husband's mansion as a self-made billionaire, you need to hear this whole story. Because what happened between that hospital room and this moment will change how you see strength forever. Let me take you back to where it all began. 12 years ago. The envelope sat on Sloane Barrett's marble kitchen counter like a ghost from a life she'd buried. Cream-colored, heavy stock, her former name printed in elegant calligraphy that belonged to a woman who no longer existed. Mrs. Sloane Ashcroft. She hadn't been Mrs. Ashcroft in 12 years. Her 16-year-old son, Reed, walked into the kitchen with his basketball still tucked under one arm, hair damp from practice. He glanced at the envelope, then at his mother's expression. The shift was subtle, but Reed had spent his entire life reading the micro-changes in his mother's face. It was how he'd learned to understand the world when the most important person in it never spoke about her pain. "What's that?" he asked, reaching into the fridge. Sloane turned the envelope over slowly, already knowing what it would say. The return address confirmed it. The Ashcroft estate. Her throat tightened, not with longing, but with the muscle memory of old wounds that had long since scarred over, but never quite disappeared. "An invitation," she said quietly. Her 14-year-old daughter, Quinn, appeared in the doorway, earbuds dangling around her neck like a question waiting to be asked. She had her father's sharp cheekbones and her mother's piercing green eyes, a combination that made strangers do double takes in grocery stores and coffee shops. She was beautiful in that unfinished way of girls on the edge of becoming, already aware of her power but not yet wielding it fully. "To what?" Quinn asked, instinctively reading the tension in the room. Sloane slid her finger under the seal and pulled out the card. Thick. Expensive. Designed to impress people who measured worth in thread count and postage weight. You are cordially invited to celebrate the 45th birthday of Mr. Warren Ashcroft III at the Ashcroft estate. Black tie. Saturday, June 17th. And beneath it, in delicate handwriting that didn't belong to Warren, it would mean so much to see you there. Let's put the past behind us. Bethany. Sloane's jaw tightened. Bethany. The woman who had been Warren's business associate during the final year of their marriage. The woman who had smiled at Sloane over charity dinners while secretly unraveling her life, thread by thread. The woman who had sent thoughtful emails about market analysis while sleeping with Sloane's husband. Is that from Dad? Reed asked. The word still felt strange. Dad. A title Warren had rejected before they were even born. A role he'd walked away from with the same casual dismissal most people reserve for declining a second slice of cake. It's from his wife, Sloane said evenly. Quinn moved closer, reading over her mother's shoulder. Why would she invite you? That was the question, wasn't it? Sloane had disappeared from their world entirely after the divorce. She'd moved to Portland, 3,000 miles from the Manhattan finance scene that suddenly felt poisonous. She'd rebuilt her career from the ground up, raised two children who had never wanted for love even when they'd been denied a father, and created a life so full and rich that Warren's absence had become irrelevant. To remind me of what I lost, Sloane said, her voice calm but edged with knowing. Or to show me what she won. Reed's expression darkened. At 16, he was protective in ways that made Sloane's heart ache with pride and worry in equal measure. You're not going. I don't know yet. Mom. Quinn's voice was softer, more curious than angry. Do you want to go? Sloane looked at her daughter, brilliant, perceptive Quinn, who saw through walls most people didn't even notice existed, who had inherited not just her mother's eyes, but her ability to read the spaces between what people said and what they meant. I want, Sloane said slowly, choosing her words with the same care she used when negotiating 8-figure deals, to show them who I became when they stopped paying attention. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking. Reed set down his water bottle with deliberate slowness. Then we're coming with you, he said. Sloane's head snapped up. Absolutely not. Why? Quinn asked, crossing her arms in a gesture so reminiscent of Sloane's own negotiating stance that it would have been funny under different circumstances. You think we can't handle seeing him? It's not about what you can handle, Sloane said. It's about protecting you from. From what? Reed interrupted. From the guy who didn't want us? We've known about that our whole lives. You never lied to us about it. Quinn nodded. You told us the truth. That he wasn't ready to be a father. That he chose to walk away. That his inability to show up had nothing to do with our worth. Those are the words. Yes, Sloane said quietly. But seeing him in person is different than knowing about him in theory. Reed moved to stand in front of his mother, and Sloane was startled as she always was these days by the fact that he was now 3 inches taller than her. When had that happened? When had her baby boy become this young man with his father's build and her stubborn determination? We're not kids who need protecting anymore, Reed said. We're old enough to see this through with you. Quinn joined her brother, a united front. Besides, don't they deserve to see what they missed? Sloane looked at her children. These two extraordinary humans she'd raised alone through sleepless nights and impossible odds and moments when she wasn't sure she could make it one more day. They were right. They weren't children anymore. Reed would be leaving for college in 2 years. Quinn was already talking about early admission programs. When had time moved so fast? Are you sure? Sloane asked. Because once we walk through those doors, there's no one seeing it. We're sure, they said in unison, and Sloane felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, not anxiety, something closer to resolution. She pulled out her phone and composed a response, her thumbs moving across the screen with the same precision she brought to everything else in her life. Thank you for the invitation. I'll be there. Sloane Barrett. Not Ashcroft. Barrett. Her name. Her identity. Her power. She hit send and felt something click into place. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving Warren wrong or making Bethany regret her choices. This was about standing in a room full of people who'd counted her out and letting them see exactly who she'd become. But to understand that woman, you need to know the woman she used to be. The one who believed in forever. The one who thought love and ambition could coexist without one devouring the other. The one who had no idea that the man she was about to marry would become the greatest lesson in self-reliance she'd ever receive. 14 years earlier, Sloan had been a rising star in venture capital. Sharp, strategic, and unafraid to bet on founders others dismissed. She'd been recruited to a prestigious firm in Manhattan at 28, one of the youngest partners they'd ever brought on. In a world dominated by men who'd inherited their positions from fathers and grandfathers, Sloan had clawed her way up with nothing but her mind and her relentless work ethic. She'd grown up in a middle-class family in Ohio. Her father was a high school math teacher. Her mother was a nurse. They'd given her a stable childhood, a good education, and the belief that intelligence mattered more than pedigree. When Sloan graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern and got into Wharton's MBA program on a full scholarship, her parents had cried with pride. Wall Street had been a shock. Not because of the work, Sloan could outwork anyone, but because of the unspoken rules. The right schools, the right families, the right last names. She'd learned quickly that being brilliant wasn't enough. You had to be brilliant and connected. Brilliant and willing to play the game. Brilliant and able to make men feel like your ideas were actually theirs. Sloan had played the game, but she'd never forgotten it was a game. By 28, she'd built a reputation as the investor who saw potential in unconventional places. A food delivery app run by immigrants. A sustainable clothing line started by 2 women who'd been rejected by 15 other VCs. A biotech startup working on affordable medical diagnostics. She didn't just chase unicorns. She created them. Warren Ashcroft walked into her office on a rainy October afternoon, tailored suit perfect, confidence bordering on arrogance. His family's investment firm had dominated East Coast finance for 3 generations, and he carried that legacy like a second skin. He was handsome in that old money way, sharp features, carefully maintained body, the kind of polish that came from a lifetime of good nutrition and better opportunities. "I need someone who sees what others miss," he'd said, settling into the chair across from her without waiting for an invitation. Sloan had looked up from her laptop, unimpressed. "Then you've come to the right place. What are you missing?" He'd smiled. Not the practiced smile of a man used to getting his way, but something genuine, almost surprised. "A partner who won't tell me what I want to hear." That first meeting turned into a working lunch at a French bistro where the waiters knew Warren by name. The lunch became a collaborative deal on a clean energy startup that netted both their firms 8 figures within 18 months. The deal became late nights in conference rooms, dissecting market trends and arguing over risk models until the cleaning crew arrived with their vacuums and polite coughs. Somewhere between the spreadsheets and the shared takeout, Sloan realized she'd fallen for him. It had snuck up on her. She wasn't the type to lose her head over a handsome face or a charming smile. But Warren was different. Or so she thought. He was brilliant, maybe not as sharp as her, but clever enough to appreciate her mind. He listened when she spoke, really listened, leaning forward with that focused attention that made you feel like the only person in the room. He challenged her assumptions without dismissing them. He made her laugh when the pressure of their world became suffocating. Their first kiss happened in her office at 2 in the morning, both of them exhausted from closing a deal that had almost fallen apart 3 times. Warren had brought champagne to celebrate. They'd toasted to their success, and when Sloan set down her glass, Warren was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she'd asked. "I'm trying to figure out," he'd said slowly, "when you went from being my toughest competitor to the person I think about first thing every morning." Sloan's breath had caught. "That's a dangerous thought." "Why?" "Because I'm thinking the same thing." When he kissed her, it felt like inevitability. Like everything had been leading to this moment. The partnership, the late nights, the way they could finish each other's sentences in pitch meetings. It all made sense suddenly. They kept the relationship quiet at first. Both of them understood the optics. A partnership turning romantic could undermine their professional credibility. But after 6 months, Warren said something that changed everything. They were at his penthouse, Sloan's head on his chest, the Manhattan skyline glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows like a promise of everything they could build together. "I don't want to hide this anymore," Warren had said. "I want everyone to know you're mine." Sloan had lifted her head to look at him. "I'm not anyone's. I'm my own." He'd smiled. Then I want everyone to know I'm lucky enough to be yours. When he proposed 3 months later on that same rooftop, the skyline glittering around them, Sloane had believed in forever. She'd said yes without hesitation. Their wedding was small by Ashcroft standards. Warren's mother had pushed for a society event, 300 guests at the plaza, coverage in the Times. But Sloane had held firm. 50 people. The garden at a historic estate in Connecticut. Vows they wrote themselves. No spectacle, just commitment. Warren had deferred to her, and Sloane had seen it as respect for her wishes. Looking back, she wondered if it was the first sign. His willingness to keep their marriage small, contained, separate from his real life. But on that day, standing under an arbor of white roses, watching Warren's eyes fill with tears as she walked toward him, Sloane had believed in the fairy tale. They honeymooned in Santorini. 2 weeks of whitewashed buildings and impossibly blue water and conversations about the future they'd build. Not just wealth, but legacy. They talked about starting their own firm, combining her instincts with his connections. They talked about the companies they'd fund, the founders they'd champion, the change they could create in an industry that desperately needed it. Warren talked about children someday. Not right away, but eventually. A boy and a girl, he'd said, both with your brains and my last name. Sloane had laughed. Your last name doesn't guarantee anything. In my world, it does, Warren had said, and Sloane had ignored the slight edge in his voice. The implication that his world and her world were somehow different. For 2 years, they were unstoppable. Sloane's instincts combined with Warren's connections created a portfolio that made headlines. Tech startups, biotech ventures, sustainable infrastructure. They didn't just fund companies. They built empires. They were featured in Forbes, the new power couple of venture capital. Interviewed on financial networks, their chemistry obvious even through television screens. Invited to speak at conferences across the globe, their presentations a perfect balance of Sloane's strategic depth and Warren's charismatic delivery. Sloane had never been happier. She had the career she'd dreamed of, the partner she'd hoped for, the life she'd built through sheer force of will and intelligence. She was 30 years old and had everything. Then she got pregnant. She'd been terrified to tell him. Not because she didn't want the baby. She did, with a fierceness that surprised her. But because she knew how consumed Warren was with their work. They were in the middle of closing the biggest deal of their careers, a clean energy company that could revolutionize power storage. Warren was working 18-hour days, flying to California twice a week, living on coffee and ambition. The timing wasn't ideal. Sloane knew that. But life rarely consulted calendars. She took the pregnancy test on a Tuesday morning, alone in their penthouse bathroom, while Warren was already at the office. The 2 pink lines appeared almost immediately, undeniable and terrifying and wonderful all at once. She'd stared at herself in the mirror, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. You're going to be a mother, she'd whispered. That evening, she'd made Warren's favorite dinner. Coco vin, the recipe his grandmother had taught her, served with a bottle of wine she didn't pour herself a glass from. Warren had come home late, distracted, already on his phone before he'd fully walked through the door. Can it wait? He'd asked when she said they needed to talk. I've got a call with the California team in 20 minutes. Sloane had swallowed her disappointment. It's important. Warren had set down his phone with visible reluctance. Okay, what's going on? I'm pregnant. The silence that followed lasted maybe 10 seconds, but felt like an hour. Warren's face had cycled through expressions. Shock. Confusion. Something that looked almost like fear. And then, finally, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's wonderful, he'd said, moving to kiss her forehead. But even as he held her, she could feel the distance already opening between them. When did you find out? He'd asked. This morning. And you're sure? I took 3 tests. He'd nodded, still smiling that hollow smile. We should celebrate. But they hadn't. Warren had taken that call with California. Sloane had eaten dinner alone, the Coke au vin tasting like ash in her mouth. Over the following weeks, Warren's reaction didn't improve. He was supportive in the abstract. He told people they were expecting when asked directly. He came to the first doctor's appointment, though he'd spent most of it on his phone in the waiting room. But the warmth between them, that electric connection that had defined their relationship, began to cool. Sloane tried to tell herself it was the stress of work. The California deal was consuming. She understood that. She was stressed too, trying to manage her own portfolio while dealing with first trimester exhaustion so profound she sometimes fell asleep at her desk. But then she developed preeclampsia at 5 months. The doctor had been direct. Your blood pressure is dangerously high. You need to reduce stress immediately. That means bed rest. Partial at first, full if it doesn't improve. Sloan had felt her world tilt. I can't. I have deals closing, presentations scheduled. The doctor had given her a look that brooked no argument. You can have deals, or you can have a healthy baby. Choose. Sloan had chosen the baby. Of course she had. She'd delegated her active deals to associates, trusting them to execute strategies she'd designed. She'd started working from home, laptop balanced on her growing belly, phone perpetually attached to her ear. Warren had grown even more distant. He started traveling more. New York to San Francisco twice a week became 3 times a week, became practically living on planes. When he was home, he was distracted, distant. His touch, when it came at all, felt obligatory. Sloan had tried to talk to him about it. One night, when he'd actually been home for dinner, she'd reached across the table to take his hand. I feel like I'm losing you, she'd said quietly. Warren had squeezed her hand briefly before pulling away. You're not losing me. I'm just stressed with work. We're both stressed, but we're supposed to be in this together. We are together, he'd said, but his eyes had already drifted to his phone. That's when she'd started noticing the other things. The perfume on his collar that wasn't hers, something floral and expensive. The texts that made him smile in ways he didn't smile at her anymore. The late nights that felt less like work and more like avoidance. Bethany Granger had joined Ashcroft Investments that spring. Brilliant resume. Wharton MBA like Sloan. Ivy League undergrad. Family money, though not Ashcroft level. And a smile that lingered too long when she looked at Warren. Sloan had met her at a firm event when she was 6 months pregnant, already showing in a way that made her feel both powerful and vulnerable. Bethany had been charming, effusive in her compliments. Warren speaks so highly of you, Bethany had said, her hand light on Warren's arm. He says you're the brilliant one. Sloan had smiled tightly. We're partners. We're both brilliant. Of course, Bethany had agreed, but her eyes had said something different. Something that made Sloan's stomach clench with more than just pregnancy discomfort. She tried to ignore the whispers at firm events. The way people's conversations would stop when she entered a room. The pitying looks from women who'd been in Manhattan society long enough to recognize the signs of a husband straying. Sloan told herself she was being paranoid. Pregnancy hormones were making her see threats where none existed. Warren loved her. They'd built a life together. He wouldn't, but he would. And he did. At 7 months pregnant, swollen and exhausted, and trying desperately to believe in the man she'd married, Sloan found the emails. She hadn't been snooping. That's what made it worse somehow. She'd been looking for a file on Warren's computer, something he'd asked her to find for a presentation. His email had been open, and a preview of a message from Bethany had caught her eye. Last night meant everything to me. Sloan's hands had started shaking. She'd clicked on the email, telling herself there was an innocent explanation. But there wasn't. The message was explicit, not in graphic detail, but in emotional intimacy. Bethany writing about how she'd never felt so connected to anyone. How Warren understood her in ways no one else did. How she couldn't stop thinking about the hotel room in San Francisco. Sloan had scrolled up, found another message. And another. Months of them. Meetings that weren't meetings. Business trips that included hotel rooms booked under Bethany's name. Declarations of feeling that Warren had never made to Sloan, at least not in years. I can't stop thinking about you. She doesn't understand you the way I do. You deserve someone who puts you first. Sloan had sat in Warren's home office, 7 months pregnant with twins she didn't even know were twins yet, and watched her marriage dissolve in a thread of emails. Her first instinct had been to close the laptop, to pretend she hadn't seen it, to protect herself from a truth she wasn't ready to face. But that instinct lasted only a moment before something harder took over. The same steel that had gotten her through Wharton, through Wall Street, through every room full of men who'd underestimated her. She'd printed the emails. All of them. Then she'd sat in the living room and waited for Warren to come home. He'd arrived past midnight, tie loosened, exhaustion etched into his features. When he saw her sitting on the couch, papers spread across the coffee table, his face had gone pale. Sloan, he'd started. Don't, she'd said quietly. Just don't. Warren had looked at the printed emails, and whatever excuse he'd been formulating died in his throat. How long? Sloan had asked. His voice was barely audible. 6 months. 6 months. Half her pregnancy. The entire time she'd been on bed rest, terrified for their baby's health. Warren had been building a life with someone else. I didn't plan for this to happen, Warren had said, and Sloan had almost laughed at the cliché. But it did happen. Yes, you're having an affair. Warren had flinched at the word. Bethany and I, we connect on a level that. He'd trailed off, perhaps finally realizing how devastating his words were. A level that what? Sloan had asked, her voice dangerously calm. A level that I don't understand because I'm too busy carrying your child? That's not fair. Fair. Sloan had stood, her hands instinctively moving to protect her swollen belly. You want to talk to me about fair? I'm 7 months pregnant, Warren. I'm on bed rest because growing your children is endangering my health. And you're sleeping with someone else and telling her she understands you better than I do. Warren's eyes had filled with tears that made Sloan want to scream. I'm sorry. For which part? The affair? The lies? Or the fact that you got caught? All of it. He'd stepped toward her. I never meant to hurt you. Sloan had stepped back. But you did. You are. And apparently you're going to keep doing it, because I don't see you ending things with her in any of these emails. The silence confirmed what she already knew. You're choosing her, Sloan had said. It wasn't a question. Warren had looked at the floor. I think, he'd started, his voice shaking. I think we both know this hasn't been working for a while. Because you've been emotionally checked out for months. Because you've been building a relationship with someone else while I've been here, trying to save our marriage and grow our child. Children, Warren had said quietly. What? The doctor called me today. We're having twins. A boy and a girl. The information had hit Sloan like a physical blow. Twins. 2 babies. And Warren had known before her, had sat with that information while deciding their marriage was over. So you know we're having twins, Sloan had said slowly, and you're still choosing to leave? Warren's face had crumpled. I'll support you. Financially, I mean. You'll never have to worry about money. The babies will have everything they need. Everything except a father. I'm not. Warren had started. I'm not cut out for this. The kids, the domestic life. It's not who I am. It's exactly who you promised to be when you married me. I know. And I'm sorry I can't be that person. Sloan had looked at the man she'd married. The man who'd promised her forever on a rooftop under stars, and seen a stranger. A coward in expensive clothes. Get out, she'd said quietly. Warren had nodded. I'll get my things. He'd moved out that night. Packed a bag while Sloan sat in the nursery they'd just finished decorating, her hand on her belly, whispering to the babies inside her that they would be okay. That she would make sure they were okay. 3 weeks later, at 32 weeks pregnant, Sloan went into early labor. She was alone in the penthouse they'd shared, Warren having already moved into a corporate apartment downtown. The contractions started around midnight, irregular at first, then coming faster and harder. She'd called her doctor, who told her to get to the hospital immediately. Sloan had called a car service. Had ridden to the hospital alone, breathing through contractions, one hand on her belly and the other gripping her phone in case she needed to call for help. The hospital had been bright and cold and full of people who all seemed to have partners. Husbands holding hands. Mothers talking nervously. Families waiting. Sloan had none of that. A nurse had admitted her, kind eyes taking in Sloan's situation with practiced sympathy. Is someone coming to be with you? No, Sloan had said. It's just me. The nurse had squeezed her hand. Then I'll stay close. Labor had been long and difficult. 18 hours of pain that felt like her body was trying to tear itself apart. The twins were in distress, heart rates dropping. The doctor had talked about C-section, but then things had stabilized and they decided to continue. Reed was born first at 6:43 in the morning, screaming his fury at the world. Loud and red-faced and more beautiful than anything Sloan had ever seen. They'd placed him on her chest, warm and slippery and perfect, and she'd cried so hard she could barely breathe. My brave boy, she'd whispered. My beautiful brave boy. Quinn followed 8 minutes later, quieter than her brother, her eyes already open and searching. When they placed her beside Reed on Sloan's chest, both babies had gone still, as if recognizing each other. As if remembering they'd shared space for 8 months and weren't quite ready to be separate yet. Sloan had held them both, tears streaming down her face, and made a promise. You will never doubt that you are loved. You will never question your worth. You will grow up knowing that you are wanted every single day. The nurse who'd stayed with her, an older woman named Ruth with silver hair and gentle hands, had wiped Sloane's tears. You're going to be an amazing mother. I don't know how to do this alone. Ruth had smiled. None of us do. But you'll figure it out. And on the hard days, you'll remember this moment. The moment you met them. That'll carry you through. Warren came to the hospital once. Sloane had texted him when the babies were born, a simple message. Reed Alexander, 6 pounds 2 ounces. Quinn Elizabeth, 5 pounds 11 ounces. Both healthy. He'd shown up that afternoon. Flowers in hand like this was a normal family moment. Sloane had been in her hospital bed, both babies asleep in their plastic bassinets beside her. Warren had stood in the doorway, looking at the twins like they were strangers. Like he couldn't quite believe they were real. They're beautiful, he'd said finally. They're yours, Sloane had replied. Warren had stepped closer, peering into the bassinets. The boy looks like my father. His name is Reed. And the girl? Quinn. After my grandmother. Warren had nodded, hands in his pockets, the flowers forgotten on the counter. Sloane, I meant what I said. I'll make sure they're taken care of. Financially. Trust funds, education, whatever they need. What they need, Sloane had said quietly, is a father who shows up. Warren's face had tightened. I can't be what you want me to be. I'm not asking you to be what I want. I'm asking you to be what they need. He'd looked at the babies again, and something had flickered across his face. Pain maybe. Or regret. But not enough to change anything. I'm not ready to be a father, he'd said finally. Then go, Sloane had said, her voice breaking despite her determination to stay strong. And don't come back unless you're ready to be all in. Don't show up for birthdays and pretend you care. Don't send checks and call it love. Either be their father or leave them alone. Warren had nodded slowly. I understand. He'd left without touching the babies. Without kissing Sloane goodbye. Just walked out of the hospital room and out of their lives like he was leaving a business meeting that hadn't gone his way. Sloane had waited until his footsteps faded before letting herself cry. Ruth, who'd been waiting in the hallway, came back in and held her while she sobbed. How do I do this? Sloane had asked. How do I raise 2 babies alone? Ruth had looked at the twins, both sleeping peacefully despite the storm around them. The same way you'll do everything else in your life. One day at a time. One decision at a time. One moment of choosing them over your fear. And that's exactly what Sloane had done. The divorce papers arrived 2 months after the twins were born. Sloane had been up for 48 hours straight, Reed refusing to sleep unless someone was holding him, Quinn needing to be fed every 90 minutes. The apartment was a disaster zone of baby clothes and dirty bottles and the general chaos that comes with newborn twins. The courier had handed her the manila envelope with professional detachment. She'd signed for it with one hand while bouncing Reed with the other, Quinn strapped to her chest in a carrier. Inside was the divorce petition. Standard language about irreconcilable differences and the dissolution of marriage. Warren's lawyer had been thorough. Division of assets, clarification of separate property, custody arrangements. Except Warren wasn't asking for custody. Not joint, not partial, not even visitation. He was relinquishing all parental rights while agreeing to financial support. And attached to the petition was a check. $2 million. Sloane had stared at the check for a long time. $2 million. More money than she'd ever had in her personal accounts. Enough to buy a house, hire help, never worry about bills. Enough to make Warren feel like he'd done his duty. She'd carried the check to the kitchen, still holding Reed, Quinn still strapped to her chest. And then she'd torn it into pieces. Slowly, deliberately, shredding it until it was confetti on the counter. Ruth, who'd agreed to help Sloane a few days a week, had watched from the doorway. You sure about that? Sloane had looked at her children. I don't want his money. I want my dignity. Dignity doesn't pay rent. No, Sloane had agreed. But it lets me look at myself in the mirror. He doesn't get to buy his way out of what he did. He doesn't get to pretend a check makes up for abandoning his children. Ruth had nodded approvingly. Then we'll figure out the rest. And they had. Sloane had responded to the divorce petition through her own lawyer, accepting the dissolution but refusing the financial settlement. Her lawyer had been baffled. He's offering you millions. You're entitled to it after what he did. I'm entitled to a lot of things, Sloane had said. His money isn't one of them. What about child support? I'll handle it. She couldn't tell her lawyer the truth, that accepting Warren's money felt like accepting his version of events, that he could walk away as long as he paid enough, that his children were a problem solved by wire transfer. Sloan refused to let that be their story. The divorce was finalized 90 days later. Clean. Fast. Warren didn't fight. He simply signed the papers and moved on with his life. Within 6 months, he was publicly dating Bethany. Within a year, they were engaged. Sloan saw the announcement in a business journal. Warren Ashcroft III and Bethany Granger were pleased to announce their engagement. She'd stared at Bethany's smiling photo, the woman who'd helped destroy her marriage, now getting the fairy tale ending. And Sloan had felt nothing. Not anger, not pain, just a hollow kind of exhaustion. She'd closed the magazine and looked at Reed and Quinn, both sitting in bouncy seats, 6 months old and already showing their distinct personalities. Reed serious and watchful. Quinn already smiling at everyone like the world was full of friends she hadn't met yet. You two are all that matters, Sloan had told them. Everything else is just noise. But even as she said it, she'd known the real work was just beginning. The first year alone was brutal. Sloan moved to Portland specifically to escape New York. The city held too many memories, too many people who knew her story. She'd found a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people minded their own business and didn't ask uncomfortable questions. The apartment was a fraction of the size of the penthouse she'd shared with Warren. No doorman, no marble counters, no floor-to-ceiling windows. Just basic rent control housing that fit her dramatically reduced budget. Sloan had savings from her years in finance, but without a steady income, that money wouldn't last long. And she refused, absolutely refused, to touch any settlement from Warren. So she'd started freelancing, consulting for small startups who couldn't afford big-name VCs but needed strategic guidance. She'd rebuilt her network carefully, reaching out to former clients who respected her work and didn't care about her personal drama. The work came in slowly at first. A few hundred here, a couple thousand there. Enough to keep the lights on. Barely enough to build savings. And all of it had to be done around the twins' schedules. Sloan worked during their naps, which were unpredictable and often didn't overlap. She took calls while bouncing a crying baby. She wrote proposals with one hand while holding a bottle with the other. Sleep became theoretical. Sloan would go days running on 3 or 4 hours, snatched in 20-minute increments between feedings and diaper changes. She'd fall asleep sitting up, wake to a baby's cry, and feel like she'd never actually rested. There were nights she sat on the bathroom floor and cried. Not because she regretted her children, but because she was so tired she couldn't remember what it felt like to be a person instead of just a mother. Because she missed adult conversation and uninterrupted sleep and the version of herself who'd felt capable of anything. But then Reed would smile at her, or Quinn would grab her finger with that surprisingly strong baby grip, and Sloan would remember why she was doing this. Ruth became her lifeline. The older woman had raised 4 children of her own and had the calm competence of someone who'd seen it all. She came 3 mornings a week, taking over twin duty while Sloan worked. "You need to take care of yourself too," Ruth would say when she found Sloan working through lunch again. "I don't have time to take care of myself." "You don't have time not to. Those babies need you healthy." So Sloan started trying. 20 minutes on a yoga mat while the twins napped. Actual meals instead of just coffee and whatever leftovers she could eat standing up. Occasionally, very occasionally, asking Ruth to stay late so she could take a real shower and sleep for more than 2 hours. The loneliness was worse than the exhaustion. In, Sloan had acquaintances, but no close friends in Portland. Everyone she'd been close to in New York was tied to her old life. And making new friends required energy she simply didn't have. She'd see other mothers at the park, clustered in groups while their children played, and feel like an outsider. They talked about their husbands, their family vacations, their village of support. Sloan had none of that. Just her and Ruth and 2 babies who needed everything. But slowly, impossibly, things started to shift. Reed and Quinn got a little older, started sleeping longer stretches, became slightly more predictable, and Sloan's consulting work started bringing in steadier money. One of her early clients, a sustainable packaging startup, had taken her advice and landed a major contract. They'd been so grateful they'd recommended her to 3 other companies. Those companies hired her. Those companies told their networks. 18 months after the divorce, Sloan's calendar was full. She wasn't making Manhattan money, not even close, but she was paying her bills on time, building a small savings account, proving to herself that she could do this. And then came the opportunity that changed everything. A tech startup reached out to her. Young founder, brilliant idea, 0 business experience. He'd created a cloud security platform that could revolutionize data protection, but every VC he'd pitched had told him the same thing. Too risky. Too unproven. Come back when you have traction. The founder's name was Jason, 24 years old, college dropout, working out of his parents' garage. Everything traditional investors hated. But Sloan saw what they didn't. The technology was genuinely innovative. The market need was enormous. And Jason, for all his youth, had the kind of obsessive focus that separated founders who succeeded from founders who flamed out. They met at a coffee shop, Jason nervous and overcaffeinated, Sloan exhausted but intrigued. I can't pay you much, Jason had admitted. But if you help me get this off the ground, I can offer you equity. Sloan had looked at this kid who reminded her of herself at that age. Brilliant and hungry and dismissed by people who should have known better. Tell me why this matters, she'd said. Not the business case. Why does this matter to you? Jason had leaned forward, and something in his expression shifted. My mom's identity was stolen last year. Criminals got into her bank accounts, her medical records, everything. It took her 9 months to get her life back. And the whole time I kept thinking, there has to be a better way to protect people's data. He'd pulled out his laptop, showing her the platform he'd built. Sloan had asked increasingly technical questions. Jason had answered every single one, his passion growing more evident with each explanation. An hour later, Sloan made a decision that would define the next decade of her life. I'll take 5% equity, she'd said. No upfront fee. If you succeed, I succeed. If you fail, I lose my time. Jason had stared at her. You bet on me like that? Sloan had smiled. I'm not betting on you. I'm investing in you. There's a difference. She'd spent the next 6 months working with Jason to refine his pitch, build financial models, and identify the right investors. All of it done during nap times and after the twins went to bed at night. All of it fueled by coffee and the growing belief that she'd found something real. Traditional VCs rejected them 15 times. Too risky. Too early. Too unconventional. But Sloan had learned something during her years on Wall Street. The best opportunities are the ones most people are too afraid to take. She'd leveraged her old network, found an angel investor willing to take a chance, and helped Jason close a seed round. Small, but enough to hire a team and build out the product. The startup gained traction faster than anyone expected. Early customers became advocates. Security analysts started writing about the technology. Bigger investors began circling. 18 months after Sloan's first meeting with Jason, a major tech company made an acquisition offer. $340 million. Sloan's 5% equity stake was worth $17 million. She'd been feeding Quinn breakfast when the offer came through, Reed playing with blocks at her feet. Jason called, his voice shaking. They want to buy us. The whole company. For how much? Sloan had asked, already doing the math. When he told her, she'd had to sit down. That night, after putting the twins to bed, Sloan had sat in her tiny living room and cried. Not from sadness this time. From relief. From validation. From the knowledge that she'd just proven to herself and anyone who doubted her that she could build something without Warren's name or connections or money. She'd done it alone. On her terms. Through sheer intelligence and instinct and refusal to quit. The next morning, she'd called her lawyer and officially launched Barrett Ventures. The name had been deliberate. Not Sloan Barrett Consulting. Not SB Investments. Barrett Ventures. A statement that she was building something permanent. The $17 million from Jason's exit became her fund. She could have taken that money, bought a house, lived comfortably without working. But Sloan wasn't interested in comfortable. She was interested in legacy. She started looking for more Jasons. More brilliant people who'd been dismissed by traditional investors. More ideas that were too risky for anyone except someone who understood what it meant to bet on yourself when no one else would. Her second investment was in a sustainable fashion brand started by two black women who'd been rejected by every VC they'd pitched. They had a brilliant concept, using recycled ocean plastic to create affordable, stylish clothing. But investor after investor had told them the market wasn't ready. Sloan had met them for coffee, listened to their pitch, and asked one question. Do you believe in this? With everything we have, they'd answered. Then so do I. That investment returned 8 times within 2 years. Her third was a biotech company working on affordable insulin alternatives. The founder was a diabetic herself who'd watched friends ration medication because they couldn't afford it. Traditional pharma investors had no interest. The margins weren't big enough. Sloan had invested anyway, because some things mattered more than margins. That company was now in FDA trials, poised to save thousands of lives. By the time Reed and Quinn turned 4, Barrett Ventures had a portfolio worth over $800 million. Sloan had gone from a woman working out of her living room to running a small but respected investment firm. She'd hired carefully, a small team of analysts who shared her vision. People who understood that the best investments weren't always the safest ones. People who believed in backing founders, not just ideas. The twins came to the office sometimes. Reed would sit at the conference table with his coloring books while Sloan ran pitch meetings. Quinn would charm everyone who walked through the door with her endless questions and infectious laugh. Sloan's team loved them. And more importantly, Reed and Quinn grew up watching their mother do what she did best. Seeing her command rooms. Watching her negotiate. Learning that being brilliant and being a mother weren't mutually exclusive. The media started noticing. Forbes ran a feature on her, the investor who never misses. Bloomberg profiled her investment strategy. She got invited to speak at conferences about finding opportunity in unconventional places. And with each success, each company she helped build, each founder she championed, Sloan felt herself healing. The woman Warren had left behind was disappearing. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who didn't need anyone's permission or validation. Someone who'd learned that the greatest revenge was living well. But healing isn't linear. Some days Sloan would see Warren's name in business news and feel that old ache. Some nights, she'd lie awake wondering what her life would have looked like if he'd stayed. If they'd raised Reed and Quinn together. If the family she'd dreamed of had been real. Those moments got fewer and further apart. But they never disappeared entirely. When the twins turned 7, Reed asked the question Sloan had been dreading. They were at the park, Reed on the swings while Quinn climbed the monkey bars with fearless determination. Reed had been quiet all afternoon, which usually meant he was thinking about something big. Mom, he'd said finally, why doesn't our dad want to see us? Sloan's heart had clenched. She'd always known this conversation was coming. She'd even practiced responses. But sitting there with her 7-year-old son, none of her practiced words felt adequate. She'd sat on the swing next to him, both of them swaying gently. Your father, she'd started carefully, wasn't ready to be a parent when you were born. That wasn't about you or your sister. It was about him. But we're older now, Reed had said with 7-year-old logic. Is he ready yet? I don't know, baby. And that's not your responsibility to figure out. Quinn had run over then, sensing the serious conversation. Are we talking about him? Yes, Sloan had said. I don't think about him. Quinn had declared with the certainty only a 7-year-old could muster. We have you. That's enough. Sloan had pulled them both close. You are so loved. You know that, right? We know, they'd said together. And if someday your father wants to be part of your life, we'll talk about it together. But his absence doesn't mean you're missing something. You're whole exactly as you are. Reed had nodded slowly. Okay. But that night, Sloan had heard him crying in his room. She'd gone in, found him curled under his blankets, and held him while he sobbed. I just want to know why, Reed had said through his tears. Sloan hadn't had an answer. How do you explain to a child that sometimes people simply aren't capable of loving the way you need to be loved? That it's not a reflection of the child's worth, but the parent's limitation? You are brilliant and kind and so loved, Sloan had whispered. And if he can't see that, it's his loss, not yours. It had taken weeks for Reed to seem like himself again. And Sloane had promised herself that she would never, ever let Warren back into their lives unless he was fully committed. She would not let him show up occasionally and break her children's hearts over and over. Years passed. Reed and Quinn grew. Barrett Ventures grew. Sloane's reputation grew. By the time the twins hit double digits, Sloane had crossed the billionaire threshold herself. Not through inheritance or marriage, but through brilliant investments and strategic decisions and an ability to see potential where others saw risk. Her portfolio was worth over $4 billion. The companies she'd funded had created thousands of jobs, disrupted entire industries, solved real problems. She'd become the investor that founders dreamed of landing. The person who could not only provide capital, but strategic guidance that actually worked. She bought a house in Portland. Nothing ostentatious, but comfortable. 4 bedrooms, a real office, a backyard where Reed could practice basketball and Quinn could read under trees. She traveled with the twins. Educational trips to different countries, experiencing cultures and perspectives that couldn't be taught in classrooms. They'd been to Japan, studying technology innovation. To Ghana, learning about social entrepreneurship. To Iceland, understanding sustainable energy. Sloane made sure they grew up understanding that wealth was a tool, not an identity. That privilege came with responsibility. That their comfortable life existed because she'd worked for it, and they would be expected to work too. Reed became quietly brilliant with numbers. By 12, he could look at a financial model and spot weaknesses that seasoned analysts missed. He was protective and thoughtful and carried an awareness that came from growing up watching his mother navigate the world as a single parent. Quinn developed a sharp wit and even sharper perception. She could read people within minutes of meeting them, sensing motives and hidden agendas that others missed. She was interested in social entrepreneurship, companies that solved problems while making profit. Both of them were proud of their mother in ways they didn't fully articulate, but showed in small gestures. The way they introduced her at school events. The way they listened when she talked about her work. The way they defended her when other kids asked insensitive questions about their family structure. They were 16 and 14 when the invitation arrived. Old enough to understand what seeing Warren meant. Old enough to make their own choices about relationship with him. Which is why Sloane let them decide whether to go to the birthday party. And which is why, on a Saturday evening in June, they found themselves in Manhattan, staying in a 4-season suite, preparing to walk into a world that had once chewed Sloane up and spit her out. But this time, she wasn't walking in as Warren Ashcroft's abandoned wife. She was walking in as Sloane Barrett, self-made billionaire, mother, investor, force of nature. And Warren Ashcroft had no idea what was about to hit him. The week leading up to Warren's birthday party moved with strange slowness. Sloane found herself going through the motions of her regular life, while mentally preparing for something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't revenge. She'd moved past that years ago. It wasn't closure either. She'd already found that in the life she'd built. This was something else. A reckoning maybe. A moment to stand in the space that had once defined her and show everyone, including herself, how completely she'd transcended it. On Monday, she called her stylist. Marina had been working with Sloane for 5 years. Ever since Barrett Ventures had grown large enough to require a professional wardrobe for conferences and investor meetings. She understood Sloane's aesthetic. Powerful without being flashy. Elegant without trying too hard. Clothes that commanded respect before a single word was spoken. "I need something for an event this weekend," Sloane had said over the phone. "What kind of event?" Marina had asked. "The kind where I need to remind some people who I am." There had been a pause. Then Marina had laughed, low and knowing. "Say no more. I know exactly what you need." The dress arrived on Wednesday. Sloane opened the garment bag in her bedroom, Reed and Quinn hovering in the doorway with unconcealed curiosity. The fabric was midnight blue, so dark it was almost black, with a subtle shimmer that caught light when it moved. The cut was simple, clean lines, tailored to perfection, emphasizing Sloane's lean frame without revealing too much. A high neckline that spoke of confidence rather than seduction. A back that dipped just low enough to be interesting. It was a dress that said, "I don't need your approval, but you'll give it anyway." Sloane held it up, studying the way the fabric moved. "That's perfect," Quinn said from the doorway. "You're going to make everyone forget how to breathe." "That's the plan," Sloane said, but her voice was quieter than she'd intended. Reed moved into the room, his expression serious. "Mom, are you sure you want to do this?" Sloane looked at her son. When had he gotten so tall? When had his voice gotten so deep? He was 16, practically a man, and she'd been so focused on building her business that sometimes she forgot to notice how quickly time was passing. "I'm sure," she said. "This isn't about him. This is about me showing myself that I can walk back into that world without flinching." "But what if it hurts?" Reed asked. "What if seeing him brings back all the bad stuff?" Sloane sat on the edge of her bed, gesturing for both kids to join her. They settled on either side, the way they'd done since they were small, and Sloane felt a rush of love so intense it was almost painful. "It might hurt," she admitted. "I'd be lying if I said I was completely indifferent to seeing Warren again. But I've learned that avoiding pain doesn't make it go away. Sometimes you have to walk straight through it to prove to yourself it can't control you anymore." Quinn leaned her head on Sloane's shoulder. "We'll be right there with you." "I know, baby." And that means everything. That evening, Sloane started working through the logistics. She booked a suite at the Four Seasons in Manhattan, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. She arranged for a car service, reliable and discreet. She cleared her calendar for the entire weekend, something she rarely did. Her assistant, Marcus, had been confused. "You're taking a whole weekend off? Are you feeling okay?" "I'm going to New York," Sloane had explained. "Personal matter." Marcus had worked for her long enough to know when not to push. "Just give me a number where I can reach you in case of emergency." "There won't be an emergency. The team can handle anything that comes up." "Still," Marcus had said, "just in case." Sloane had given him her cell number, knowing he'd only use it if something truly critical happened. That was the benefit of building a solid team. They could function without her constant oversight. On Thursday, she took Reed and Quinn shopping for their outfits. Reed needed a new suit, having outgrown his last one in the way teenage boys do, shooting up 3 inches seemingly overnight. They found one in charcoal gray that made him look older, more sophisticated. "You look like you could run a company," the salesman had said. "You probably could," Sloane had replied, and meant it. For Quinn, they found a dress in emerald green that made her eyes luminous. It was age-appropriate but elegant, with a classic cut that would let her fit seamlessly into Warren's world of old money and older expectations. Quinn had studied herself in the mirror, turning to see all angles. "Do I look like I belong there?" Sloane had met her daughter's eyes in the reflection. "You belong anywhere you choose to be. Don't let anyone tell you different." The night before they left, Sloane couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind running through scenarios. What she would say, how Warren might react, whether Bethany would be gracious or cutting, whether she'd feel the old pain or the new indifference. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and went to her home office. She pulled up Warren's company website, something she hadn't looked at in years. Ashcroft Investments had grown, expanded into new markets, taken on high-profile clients. Warren's photo was prominently featured, older now with distinguished silver at his temples, but still handsome in that polished way that came from a lifetime of privilege. Beside his photo was Bethany's, VP of Strategic Development. She'd climbed the ladder, built her career in the company where she'd started as an analyst. Her smile in the professional headshot was confident, bordering on smug. Sloane studied the woman who'd helped destroy her marriage and felt nothing. No anger, no jealousy. Just a distant curiosity about what Bethany saw when she looked in the mirror. Whether she ever thought about the family she'd helped break apart. Whether winning Warren had felt like the victory she'd imagined. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Quinn appeared in the doorway, pajamas rumpled, hair in a messy bun. "Can't sleep either," she asked. Sloane shook her head. "Too much on my mind." Quinn settled into the chair across from Sloane's desk. "Are you looking at him?" "Just doing reconnaissance. Know your battlefield and all that." "Mom," Quinn said slowly. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you still love him?" The question hit harder than Sloane expected. She took a moment before answering, wanting to be truthful but not burden her 14-year-old daughter with complicated adult emotions. "I loved who I thought he was," Sloane said finally. "The man I married, the partner I believed in. That person either never existed or stopped existing a long time ago. So no, I don't love Warren Ashcroft. But I do grieve sometimes for the life I thought we'd have." "That makes sense," Quinn said. Then, quieter. "I used to imagine what he was like. Create this whole story about why he left. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he was struggling with something he couldn't tell you about. Maybe he really did love us, but just couldn't figure out how to show it. Sloane's heart broke a little. And now? Now I think some people are just selfish. And we got lucky because his selfishness meant we got all of you instead of half. Sloane felt tears prick her eyes. When did you get so wise? I have a good teacher, Quinn said with a small smile. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the occasional car passing on the street outside. Finally, Quinn stood and moved around the desk to hug her mother. Whatever happens tomorrow, we're going to be okay, Quinn whispered. Because we have each other. Yes, we do, Sloane agreed, holding her daughter close. Yes, we do. Friday arrived with clear skies and the kind of crisp air that promised a beautiful weekend. Their flight was at noon, first class on a commercial airline. Sloane could have chartered a private jet, certainly had the resources for it now, but that felt too ostentatious. Too much like she was trying to prove something. The real power, she'd learned, was in not needing to prove anything at all. At the airport, Reed carried both his and Quinn's bags, his protective instincts on full display. Quinn walked beside Sloane, earbuds in, nodding along to whatever music was helping her process the weekend ahead. In the first-class lounge, they attracted a few curious glances. A beautiful woman with two teenagers, all of them carrying themselves with quiet confidence. A businessman tried to start a conversation with Sloane, asking if she was traveling for work or pleasure. Neither, Sloane had replied pleasantly. Family obligation. The flight was smooth. Sloane tried to work, reviewing a pitch deck from a new founder, but found her concentration slipping. She kept reading the same slide over and over, the words refusing to penetrate her distraction. Reed was reading a book on market economics. Quinn was sketching in her journal, something she did when she was nervous. Sloane watched her children and felt a surge of gratitude so profound it was almost overwhelming. Whatever else Warren had done, whatever pain he'd caused, he'd given her these two extraordinary humans. And in walking away, he'd given her the space to raise them entirely on her terms, without compromise or consultation. Maybe that was the greatest gift he'd ever given her. His absence. They landed at JFK just after 3. The car Sloane had arranged was waiting, a sleek black sedan with a driver who understood that sometimes passengers want silence more than small talk. As they drove through Queens into Manhattan, Sloane watched the city unfold outside her window. She'd lived here for 8 years, built her career here, fallen in love here, had her heart shattered here. Every block held memories, some beautiful, some devastating. The skyline appeared, that iconic silhouette of ambition and possibility and broken dreams. Sloane had forgotten how overwhelming New York could be. The noise, the crowds, the relentless energy of millions of people all chasing something. Portland was quieter, slower, more manageable. This city felt like it wanted to devour you. The Four Seasons was exactly as she remembered. Elegant, understated luxury, the kind of place that catered to people who didn't need to announce their wealth. The staff treated them with polished professionalism, their suite ready ahead of schedule. When they walked in, Quinn gasped. The view was spectacular, Central Park spreading out below them in shades of green, the city rising beyond it like a forest of glass and steel. This is incredible, Quinn said, pressing her face to the window. Reed was more measured in his reaction, but Sloane saw him taking it all in, cataloging the details the way he always did. Sloane tipped the bellhop and closed the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment. They had 18 hours before the party. 18 hours to prepare, to steel themselves, to remember why they were doing this. Let's order room service, she suggested, and try to have a normal evening. They did. Pizza and pasta from the hotel restaurant, eaten on the suite's oversized couch, while watching a movie none of them paid attention to. They were all too aware of what tomorrow held. That night, after the kids had gone to their rooms, Sloane stood at the window looking out over the park. The city lights created a false daylight, pollution turning the sky orange instead of black. She remembered standing at windows like this with Warren, planning their future, believing in forever. That woman felt like a stranger now. Someone Sloane had been briefly, before life taught her harder truths. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ruth, who still occasionally helped with the twins, even though they were far too old to need a nanny now. Thinking of you this weekend. Remember, you're not the woman he left. You're the woman who survived him leaving. Big difference. Sloane smiled and texted back. Thank you. I needed that. She slept better than she expected. No nightmares, no anxiety dreams. Just deep, dark sleep that felt like her body's way of storing up strength for what was coming. Saturday morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the windows. Sloane woke early, her internal clock still on Portland time, and went for a run through Central Park. The paths were already crowded with other runners, dogs, families starting their weekend. She ran hard, pushing herself until her lungs burned and her legs ached. Physical exhaustion to quiet mental noise. By the time she got back to the hotel, she felt centered, ready. Reed and Quinn were awake, both of them quieter than usual. The weight of the evening ahead pressing down on all of them. They had a late breakfast. Sloane barely tasted her food, but made herself eat. She'd learned long ago that you couldn't face difficult things on an empty stomach. At 2, Sloane's hairstylist arrived, someone Marina had recommended in New York. She swept Sloane's dark hair into an elegant updo, simple but sophisticated. Makeup followed, subtle but flawless. Sloane watched her reflection transform, saw herself becoming the version of herself that could walk into Warren's world without flinching. Quinn got ready in her room with an enthusiasm that masked nervousness. When she emerged in her emerald dress, makeup done with a surprisingly mature hand, Sloane's breath caught. You're so beautiful, Sloane said. I learned from the best, Quinn replied. Reed was ready first, his suit fitting perfectly, his hair styled in a way that made him look at least 18. He kept checking his phone, a nervous habit Sloane recognized because she did the same thing. At 5:30, Sloane put on her midnight blue dress. It fit like it had been made for her body specifically, which it had. She clasped a simple diamond pendant around her neck, a piece she'd bought herself after her first major exit. Not Warren's money. Hers. The woman in the mirror was powerful, poised, completely in control. Sloane barely recognized her. Are you ready? She asked her reflection. The woman staring back didn't answer, but her eyes said yes. At 6, they gathered in the suite's living room. 3 people who'd been through hell together and come out stronger. 3 people who didn't need Warren Ashcroft, but were about to remind him what he'd thrown away. Sloane looked at her children. Whatever happens tonight, she said. We stay together. If anyone makes you uncomfortable, we leave. This is on our terms. Reed nodded. Quinn squeezed her mother's hand. Let's do this, Quinn said. The car was waiting downstairs. They slid into the back seat, and as the driver pulled into Manhattan traffic, Sloane felt her heartbeat accelerate. Not from fear, from anticipation. The drive to the Hamptons took 90 minutes. They were silent for most of it, each lost in their own thoughts. The city gave way to suburbs, suburbs to estates, the concentration of wealth increasing with every mile. When they finally turned onto the private road leading to the Ashcroft estate, Sloane felt time compress. She'd been to this house before, years ago, when she and Warren were still married. His family's summer home, a sprawling mansion that screamed old money and older secrets. The driveway was lined with luxury cars. Bentleys, Teslas, a vintage Rolls-Royce that probably cost more than most people's houses. Valets in crisp uniforms directed traffic, their movements choreographed from years of managing events like this. When their car pulled up to the entrance, one of the valets opened Sloane's door with a practiced smile. She stepped out. The effect was immediate and electric. Several people near the entrance turned, conversations faltering mid-sentence. A woman in a red gown actually froze, champagne glass halfway to her lips. Sloane could feel the ripple of recognition spreading through the crowd like a wave. Is that Sloane Barrett? I thought she moved away. What is she doing here? Sloane helped Quinn out of the car, her movements deliberately slow, giving everyone time to look. Reed emerged last, tall and imposing, and the whispers intensified. Those must be his kids. They look just like him. Does Warren know they're here? Sloane took a moment to adjust Quinn's wrap, to straighten Reed's tie, giving the crowd time to absorb their presence. Then, with her children flanking her like soldiers, she walked toward the entrance. The marble foyer was exactly as she remembered. Grand staircase sweeping up to the second floor. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost 6 figures each. Art on the walls that belonged in museums. Everything designed to intimidate, to remind visitors that they were in the presence of real wealth, generational wealth, the kind that came from family names older than the country itself. Staff circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played something classical in the corner. The crowd was exactly what Sloane expected. Manhattan elite, finance people, old money families who summered in the Hamptons and wintered in Aspen. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and took a small sip, her eyes scanning the room. And then she saw him. Warren stood near the fireplace, surrounded by a cluster of executives and investors. He'd aged well, damn him. The silver at his temples made him look distinguished rather than old. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored. He was laughing at something someone said, completely at ease in his element. Beside him stood Bethany. She was beautiful in that carefully maintained way that came from personal trainers and good dermatologists, and the kind of self-care that required both money and time. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves. Her dress was designer, something that probably had a name Sloane couldn't pronounce. Jewelry caught the light with every movement. Her hand rested on Warren's arm. Possessive. Proprietary. This is mine, the gesture said. Sloane felt nothing. No jealousy, no anger. Just a distant curiosity about whether the fairy tale had lived up to Bethany's expectations. She moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who'd attended 1,000 events like this. Several people recognized her, old acquaintances from her New York days, their expressions ranging from surprise to discomfort to genuine warmth. Sloane Barrett, a woman named Catherine, approached, someone who'd been at one of the firms Sloane had worked with years ago. I'd heard you'd left the city. I did, Sloane said pleasantly. I'm based in Portland now. But you're doing well, Catherine said, and it was less a question than a statement. I've been following Barrett Ventures. Impressive portfolio. Thank you. We're proud of the companies we've backed. Catherine's eyes moved to Reed and Quinn. And these must be your children. Reed and Quinn, Sloane confirmed. This is their first time seeing New York society in action. Lucky them, Catherine said dryly, and Sloane laughed despite herself. They chatted for a few more minutes, the kind of polite small talk that greased the wheels of events like this. Other people approached, curious about Sloane's presence, about her children, about why she'd returned after all these years. Sloane was gracious with everyone, poised, giving nothing away. But she was aware, with every conversation, every smile, every sip of champagne, of Warren across the room, of the moment when his eyes would finally land on her. It took 15 minutes. Sloane was talking to a hedge fund manager about sustainable investing when she felt it. That prickle of awareness that comes from being watched. She glanced up, and there he was. Warren had turned, his gaze sweeping the room in that habitual way people do at parties, and he'd frozen. His face went completely pale. The color drained so quickly Sloane wondered if he might actually faint. The champagne glass in his hand trembled, tiny waves rippling across the surface. He was staring at her like she was a ghost, like his mind couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. And then his gaze moved to Reed and Quinn. The recognition that crossed his face was almost painful to watch. Reed had his jawline, his build, the set of his shoulders. Quinn had his bone structure, his intensity, that same way of looking at the world like she was cataloging everything for future reference. These were his children. Undeniable. Unavoidable. Standing in his home, like living proof of every choice he'd made. Bethany followed Warren's stare. When she saw Sloane, her smile faltered. Just for a second, just long enough for Sloane to catch it, her carefully maintained composure cracked. Family, let me tell you something. There are moments in life when everything you've built, everything you've survived, everything you've become, it all comes down to a single instant. This was that instant. 12 years of pain and growth and transformation, all leading to this moment when Sloane Barrett stood in Warren Ashcroft's home and reminded him what he'd thrown away. If you're feeling this, if your heart is racing right now, I need you to show some love. Hit that like button. Drop a comment saying I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline. Because what happens next, this is what we've been building toward. Stay with me. Sloane didn't rush. She finished her conversation with the hedge fund manager, her voice steady, her hands calm. She introduced Reed and Quinn to a few more people, letting them see how effortlessly her children fit into this world despite never being part of it. And only when she was ready, only when she'd proven to herself that she could stand in this space without flinching, did she begin moving in Warren's direction. Not directly. That would have been too obvious. But gradually, conversation by conversation, working her way across the room like she had all the time in the world. Because she did. Warren was the one who looked like he was drowning. When she was about 10 feet away, close enough that Warren couldn't avoid her without being obviously rude, she paused. Met his eyes. Smiled. Not a warm smile. Not cruel either. Just acknowledgement. I see you seeing me. Warren said something to the people around him and started moving toward her. Bethany followed, her expression tight, her hand still on his arm like she was afraid he might float away if she let go. The crowd sensed something happening. Conversations quieted. People shifted positions to get a better view. Everyone in that room knew the history, or thought they did. Warren Ashcroft and his first wife. The marriage that had ended badly. The children he'd never acknowledged. This was better than entertainment. This was real drama unfolding in real time. Warren reached Sloane, and for a moment they just looked at each other. 12 years compressed into the space between them. A marriage, a betrayal, 2 children, 2 completely different lives built from the wreckage. Sloane, Warren said. His voice cracked slightly on her name. Hello, Warren, Sloane replied, her tone perfectly pleasant. Happy birthday. Warren started, then seemed to lose his train of thought. I didn't think you'd come. Sloane's smile sharpened slightly. Bethany was kind enough to invite me. It would have been rude to decline. Warren's eyes moved to Reed and Quinn, standing slightly behind their mother, united in their quiet judgment. These are, Warren tried again, but the words stuck in his throat. Your children, Sloane finished for him. Reed and Quinn. They wanted to see where their father lived. The word father landed in the sudden silence like a stone in still water. Around them, people who'd been pretending not to listen gave up the pretense entirely. Warren's face was doing complicated things. Shock, pain, regret, all cycling through in rapid succession. He looked at Reed, at Quinn, and something in his expression crumpled. They're so, he whispered. Grown? Sloane supplied. Yes, that tends to happen over 12 years. Bethany stepped forward, her smile brittle as glass. Sloane, how lovely that you could make it. You look well. Thank you, Sloane said. So do you. The pleasantries felt like violence. 2 women who'd destroyed and been destroyed by the same man, exchanging courtesies like they were discussing the weather. And your children are beautiful, Bethany continued, though the words sounded like they were costing her something. They are, Sloane agreed. I'm very proud of them. An awkward silence descended. Warren seemed incapable of speech, just staring at his children like he was trying to memorize their faces. Reed broke the tension. His voice was calm, but Sloane heard the steel underneath. Nice house, Reed said. Must be hard to keep up. Warren blinked. We manage. I'm sure, Reed replied. Mom's place in Portland is smaller, but it's actually a home. The distinction wasn't subtle. House versus home. Structure versus sanctuary. Quinn nodded, her voice sweet but cutting. Yeah, homes are different than houses. Homes have people in them who actually care about each other. Sloane didn't reprimand them. Their honesty was earned. 12 years of growing up without a father gave them the right to speak their truth. Warren's eyes were glistening now, actual tears forming, though he was fighting to keep them from falling. I'm glad you're all here, he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. Maybe we could talk? Privately? About what? Sloane asked. About. Warren glanced around at the watching crowd. Everything. The past. The kids. I've wanted to reach out so many times. But you didn't, Reed interrupted. His voice was harder now, the protective son who'd watched his mother struggle alone. You had 12 years. You chose not to. Warren flinched like he'd been struck. I made terrible mistakes. I know that. But seeing. You now, both of you. His gaze moved between Reed and Quinn. I want to try? If you'll let me. Quinn studied him with those sharp green eyes that missed nothing. You don't get to want things from us just because it's convenient now. I know I don't deserve, Warren started. You're right, Quinn said quietly. You don't. Bethany's face flushed red. Now wait just a minute, she started, her voice rising. Sloane's gaze cut to her with surgical precision. The temperature in the immediate area seemed to drop 10 degrees. I'd be very careful about what you say next, Sloane said, her voice soft but absolutely lethal. The room went completely silent. Even the string quartet seemed to fade, though they were probably still playing. Bethany's mouth snapped shut. Sloane turned her full attention back to Warren. When she spoke, her voice carried across the marble foyer, reaching every curious ear. "You asked what I've been doing," she said. "I built Barrett Ventures from nothing. From a 2-bedroom apartment in Portland with 2 infants and no sleep and no safety net. I raised 2 incredible children alone. Every doctor's appointment, every parent-teacher conference, every nightmare, every triumph. Just me." She took a step closer to Warren. "I funded companies that are changing the world. Clean energy, affordable healthcare, technology that actually helps people instead of just making shareholders rich. I created something that matters. Another step. And I did all of it without you." Warren's face crumpled. Tears were streaming now, unchecked. "I know," he choked out. "And I'm so sorry." Sloane shook her head slowly. "I don't need your apology. I needed it 12 years ago when I was in labor alone in a hospital. I needed it when Reed took his first steps, and you weren't there to see it. I needed it when Quinn asked me why her daddy didn't want her, and I had to explain that some people just aren't capable of loving the way they should." Her voice never rose, never broke. Each word was measured, deliberate, landing with devastating accuracy. "I don't need it now," she continued, "because I learned something you never understood. My worth isn't determined by who stays. It's determined by what I build when everyone leaves." The silence was absolute. 100 people holding their breath. "I learned that I am enough," Sloane said. "That my children are enough. That the family we created from your abandonment is whole and beautiful and stronger than anything you and I ever had." Warren was sobbing now, quietly but unmistakably. Bethany stood frozen beside him, her hand finally dropping from his arm. "I learned," Sloane said, her voice softening slightly, "that the greatest gift you ever gave me was leaving. Because if you'd stayed, I never would have discovered who I really am. I would have been your wife instead of my own woman. I would have raised our children to compromise and settle instead of teaching them to demand everything they deserve." She looked at Reed and Quinn, both of them standing tall beside her. "So thank you, Warren, for walking away, for showing me that I didn't need you or your family's money or your connections or your name, for forcing me to build something entirely my own." Sloane turned to her children. "Ready to go?" Reed nodded. Quinn smiled. They turned together, a united front, and started walking toward the exit. Behind them, Warren's voice broke. "Sloane, please." She paused but didn't turn around. "If you want to be part of their lives," Sloane said quietly, her voice still carrying in the silent room, "you'll have to earn it. On their terms. Not yours. You'll have to show up consistently, honestly, with no expectations of forgiveness or gratitude. You'll have to be the father you should have been from the beginning." She glanced back over her shoulder. "And if you can't do that, if you can't give them everything they deserve, then do them the kindness of staying away. They've built a good life without you. Don't tear it down with half measures and guilty conscience." Then she walked out, Reed and Quinn beside her, leaving behind a room full of people who would talk about this moment for years. The valet brought their car around immediately. As they slid into the back seat, Quinn let out a long, shaky breath. "That was intense," she said. Reed was staring at his mother with something like awe. "You were amazing." Sloane leaned her head back against the seat, adrenaline starting to fade, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "So were you both. Do you think he'll actually try?" Quinn asked. "To be in our lives?" Sloane considered. "Maybe, but it doesn't matter. We're okay either way." "More than okay," Reed said, and squeezed his mother's hand. The car pulled away from the estate, leaving the light and noise behind. Through the back window, Sloane could see people clustered on the steps, probably dissecting what had just happened, already crafting the story they'd tell at their next dinner party. She didn't care. As they drove back toward Manhattan, the tension in the car gradually dissolved. Quinn pulled out her phone and started scrolling. Reed stared out the window at the passing darkness. Sloane's phone buzzed. A text from her assistant, Marcus. The Kensington deal closed. $450 million exit. Congratulations. Sloane smiled and showed the message to her kids. Another win? Quinn asked. Another win, Sloane confirmed. Reed grinned. What's next? Sloane thought about the pipeline of founders waiting for her decision. The sustainable agriculture startup she was considering. The women's health company that reminded her of why she'd gotten into this business in the first place. The education technology platform that could change how kids learned. Everything, she said softly. Everything's next. They got back to the Four Seasons around 10, changed out of their formal clothes into comfortable pajamas, and ordered room service. Burgers and fries and ice cream sundaes. Comfort food to process an emotionally exhausting night. They ate on the couch, some mindless action movie playing on the television that none of them really watched. "Mom," Quinn said during a commercial break. "Thank you." "For what?" Sloan asked. "For being enough. For never making us feel like we were missing something. For showing us what strength looks like." Sloan felt her throat tighten. "You two are the best thing I've ever done. Better than any company, any deal, any amount of success. You're my greatest achievement." Reed leaned against her shoulder. "We know." They stayed up late, talking about nothing and everything. The future, college plans, whether Quinn would really pursue social entrepreneurship or if it was just a phase. Whether Reed would go into finance or do something completely different. Around midnight, both kids finally retreated to their rooms. Sloan stood at the window one last time, looking out over the city that had once broken her. She felt lighter somehow, like a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying had finally lifted. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "It's Warren. I got your number from the event planner. I know I don't have the right to contact you, but I need you to know something. Watching you tonight, seeing the woman you've become and the children you've raised, I've never regretted anything more in my life. You were right about everything. I was weak. I was selfish. I destroyed the best thing I ever had. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve the chance to try. But if Reed and Quinn are willing, I'd like to be part of their lives. Whatever that looks like. On their terms. I'll wait to hear from you." Sloan read the message twice. Then she set her phone down without responding. She'd think about it tomorrow. Maybe. Or maybe she'd let Reed and Quinn make the decision entirely on their own. They were old enough. Wise enough. They didn't need her to protect them from Warren anymore. But tonight, she was done thinking about him. Tonight she wanted to sit in the satisfaction of having faced her past and walked away stronger. Sunday morning, they slept late and had brunch at a cafe in Central Park. Bagels and coffee and conversation that had nothing to do with Warren or the party or any of it. They walked through the park, fed the ducks, watched street performers. Reed bought a pretzel from a vendor. Quinn took about 100 photos for her Instagram. They were just a family having a normal day in the city. Their flight home wasn't until evening, so they spent the afternoon at the Museum of Modern Art. Quinn loved the contemporary installations. Reed was fascinated by a digital art exhibit. Sloan just enjoyed watching her children experience the world. At the airport, waiting to board, Quinn brought up the subject they'd all been avoiding. "What are you going to do about his text?" she asked. "I'm not going to do anything," Sloan said. "This isn't my decision to make. It's yours." Reed looked up from his book. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you two want to get to know Warren, I'll support that. If you don't, I'll support that too. This is about what you need, not what I want." "What do you want?" Quinn asked. Sloan thought about it. "Honestly, I want you to have every opportunity to know where you come from. Every relationship you could possibly want. But I also want you to protect yourselves. To have realistic expectations. To understand that people don't change just because they're sorry. So you think we should give him a chance," Reed said. "I think you should do whatever feels right to you. And I think you're both wise enough to make that decision." The twins looked at each other. One of those silent conversations that only siblings who'd been together since the womb could have. "One coffee," Quinn said finally. "And if he's late, we leave." Reed nodded. "Agreed." Sloan smiled. "Okay then." On the flight home, Sloan drafted a response to Warren's text. "Reed and Quinn have agreed to meet you for coffee. Once. They'll contact you directly to arrange it. Don't be late. Don't make promises you can't keep. And understand that this is a gift they're giving you, not a right you've earned." Sloan. She showed the message to the twins before sending it. They both nodded approval. She hit send. 3 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in Portland, Sloan sat in her car outside a coffee shop downtown. Inside, Reed and Quinn were meeting with Warren for the first time since the party. Sloan had offered to come in with them, but they'd both declined. This was something they needed to do on their own. So she waited. Watched through the window as Warren arrived 15 minutes early, nervous energy obvious even from a distance. Watched as her children walked in exactly on time, back straight, faces guarded. She couldn't hear the conversation, could only watch body language. Warren leaning forward, earnest. Reed's arms crossed defensively. Quinn asking questions that made Warren's face crumple. It went on for over an hour. At one point, Warren started crying. Reed's posture softened slightly. Quinn handed him a napkin. When they finally emerged, Quinn hugged Warren briefly. Reed shook his hand. It wasn't warmth exactly, but it wasn't rejection either. Progress. They got in the car, and Sloane waited for them to speak first. Well, she asked finally. He's trying, Reed said carefully. Like, really trying. It's weird, but he's trying. He told us everything, Quinn added. About why he left. About how scared he was. About all the regrets he's carried. It was uncomfortable. Good, Sloane said. Regret should be uncomfortable. Are you okay with this? Reed asked. With us getting to know him? Sloane looked at her son, nearly grown now, already taller than her, with a heart bigger than he usually let show. I'm okay with whatever you two decide. This is your choice. Your relationship. I'm just here to support you. Quinn leaned forward from the back seat and hugged her mother. We know. That's why we can even consider this. As they drove home through familiar Portland streets, past the coffee shops and bookstores and parks that had become their landscape, Sloane felt something settle deep in her chest. Not closure exactly. Something better. Peace. The understanding that some stories don't have neat endings. Some relationships stay messy and complicated and imperfect. But the relationship she'd built with herself, with her strength, with her unwavering belief that she deserved more, that was ironclad. Warren could try to rebuild bridges with Reed and Quinn, or he could fail again. Either way, Sloane's life would continue forward, because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. You don't need someone who left to validate your worth. You just need to show up for yourself, every single day, and build something so magnificent that their absence becomes irrelevant. Over the following months, Warren did try. He flew to Portland once a month to have coffee with Reed and Quinn. He never pushed for more than they were willing to give. He listened more than he talked. He was patient with their questions, their anger, their slow warming. Bethany, according to the kids, was less enthusiastic about Warren's new commitment to his first family. But that wasn't Sloane's problem to solve. Reed and Quinn's relationship with their father evolved into something neither warm nor cold. Cordial. Cautious. They'd video chat occasionally. Warren would ask about school, about their interests, about their lives. He sent thoughtful birthday gifts. He showed up when he said he would. It wasn't the relationship they might have had if he'd been there from the beginning. But it was something. And that was enough. Sloane dated occasionally. Nothing serious. She was too focused on her work, her kids, her own continued growth to invest deeply in romance. Maybe someday. Maybe not. She'd learned that happiness didn't require a partner. Barrett Ventures continued to thrive. By the time Reed left for college, choosing Stanford Business School with the intent to eventually join his mother's firm, Sloane's portfolio was worth over $6 billion. The companies she'd funded had created over 20,000 jobs, had solved real problems in healthcare, education, sustainability, had proven that you could do well by doing good. Sloane was invited to speak at conferences around the world, was profiled in major publications, was recognized as one of the most influential investors of her generation. But her proudest moments were smaller. Quinn's high school graduation, where she gave a valedictorian speech about resilience that made Sloane cry. Reed's first semester at Stanford, where he called home every Sunday just to talk. The quiet mornings in her Portland house with coffee and newspapers, and the kind of peace that can't be bought. One evening, about a year after the birthday party, Sloane received a package. Inside was a handwritten letter from Warren and a series of photographs. The letter was simple. Thank you for giving Reed and Quinn the space to know me. Thank you for raising them to be forgiving even when they had every right not to be. Thank you for being the parent I couldn't be. You are extraordinary, and I was a fool. Warren. The photographs were of Reed and Quinn at various ages. Copies Warren had requested from Sloane's collection. First days of school. Halloween costumes. Birthday parties. All the moments he'd missed. Sloane looked at the photos for a long time. Then she filed them away without responding to the letter. Some things didn't need a response. Some acknowledgments could stand on their own. On a crisp fall afternoon, 2 years after the party, Sloane stood in front of a room full of young entrepreneurs at a women's business conference. She'd been invited to give a keynote about building from nothing. The audience was full of women like she'd once been. Ambitious, talented, hungry for success, but not sure how to claim it in a world that wasn't built for them. Sloane looked out at them and felt that same fierce protectiveness she felt for her children. "I'm going to tell you something that took me too long to learn," she began. "Your worth is not determined by who believes in you. It's determined by whether you believe in yourself." She told them her story. Not all of it, but the parts that mattered. Building a career in a male-dominated industry. Losing everything when her marriage fell apart. Starting over with nothing but her mind and her determination. "The hardest thing I ever did," she said, "was accept that the life I'd planned was gone. That the partner I'd counted on was never coming back. That I had to build something entirely new from complete wreckage." She paused, making eye contact with women throughout the room. "But you know what I learned? The hardest things teach the best lessons. I learned that I was stronger than I knew. That I could create opportunities instead of waiting for someone to give them to me. That being underestimated is actually an advantage because people don't see you coming." The room was completely silent. "So here's what I want you to take from today," Sloane said. "Whatever you're facing, whatever obstacle feels insurmountable, whatever person told you that you can't, remember this. Your setback is not your story. Your comeback is. And you get to write that story exactly the way you want." When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Women stood, some crying, all of them understanding that they'd just heard something true and powerful and necessary. Afterward, dozens of women approached her, shared their stories, asked for advice, thanked her for her honesty. One young woman, barely 25, waited until the crowd cleared before approaching. She looked nervous, hands twisting together. "Thank you," she said quietly. "My husband just left me. I'm pregnant. I have no idea how I'm going to do this alone." Sloane looked at this young woman standing where she'd once stood and felt her heart crack open. "You're going to do it the same way I did," Sloane said gently. "One day at a time. One decision at a time. One moment of choosing yourself over your fear." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "What if I fail?" "Then you get up and try again. Failure isn't falling down. It's staying down." Sloane reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. "Call my office. Ask for Marcus. Tell him I said to set up a meeting. If you have a business idea, any idea at all, I want to hear it." The woman stared at the card like it was a winning lottery ticket. "Are you serious?" "Completely. I invest in people who've been underestimated. And right now, you're probably underestimating yourself more than anyone." The woman left crying, clutching the business card like a lifeline. Sloane watched her go and thought about the version of herself who'd been abandoned and pregnant and terrified, who'd had no one to offer her a hand up. She couldn't go back and help that woman, but she could help this one, and the next one, and the one after that. Maybe that was the real legacy, not the billions in her portfolio, not the companies she'd built, but the doors she could open for women who'd been told they didn't belong. That evening, back in her hotel room, Sloane called Reed and Quinn on video chat. "How was the speech?" Quinn asked. "Good. Really good, actually." Sloane smiled. "I met a young woman who reminded me of myself at that age." "Did you help her?" Reed asked. "I'm going to try." They chatted for a while about nothing important. Quinn's upcoming debate tournament. Reed's economics professor who was brilliant but couldn't teach. The dog they were considering adopting once Reed came home for normal family conversation. The kind Warren had given up the right to have. Before they hung up, Reed said something that stopped Sloane cold. "Mom, I've been thinking. After I graduate, I want to join Barrett Ventures. Not just as an analyst. I want to learn the business. Eventually take it over when you're ready to slow down." Sloane's throat tightened. "You're sure? I've watched you build something that matters. I want to be part of that. I want to help continue what you started." Quinn jumped in. "And I want to start a foundation focused on women entrepreneurs, using some of our success to create opportunities for people who don't have them." Sloane looked at her children through the screen, these extraordinary humans who'd grown up watching her fight and survive and ultimately thrive. "I would be honored," she said, her voice thick with emotion. After they hung up, Sloane stood at her hotel window, looking out at the unfamiliar city lights. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the heartbreak, the struggle, the slow rebuilding of a life she'd thought was over. She thought about Warren, probably in his mansion with Bethany, surrounded by wealth that had always been his, never earned through suffering. She thought about Reed and Quinn, strong and brilliant and kind, everything good in her life distilled into two perfect humans. And she thought about herself, the woman she'd become. Not in spite of what Warren had done, but because of it. If someone had told her, 12 years ago in that hospital room, that she'd end up here, she never would have believed them. The pain had been too fresh. The future too uncertain. The task of raising twins alone too overwhelming. But here she was, not just surviving, thriving. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Marcus. You have 3 pitch meetings tomorrow. A clean tech startup, a women's health company, and that education platform you were interested in. Which order do you want them? Sloan smiled and typed back. Education platform first, then women's health, then clean tech, and clear my Thursday. I want to take that young woman from today's conference to lunch. Marcus responded immediately. Already on it. You're going to change her life, you know. Maybe, Sloan typed. Or maybe I'm just going to show her that she can change her own life. There's a difference. She set her phone down and caught her reflection in the window. 42 years old. Single mother. Billionaire. Force of nature. The woman Warren had abandoned was gone, replaced by someone he wouldn't even recognize. And that, Sloan thought, was the sweetest victory of all. Not that she'd won some competition with him, but that she'd transcended the need for competition entirely. She'd built a life so full and rich and meaningful that Warren's presence or absence had become completely irrelevant. That's what freedom looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose strong enough to make the pain worthwhile. Sloan Barrett had found that purpose. In her children. In her work. In the doors she opened for others. In the empire she'd built from nothing but determination and brilliance and refusing to stay down. The envelope that had arrived months ago, the invitation that had started all of this, sat in her desk drawer at home. She'd kept it, not as a trophy, as a reminder of where she'd been, of what she'd overcome, of the woman she'd become when the world stopped believing in her. That woman was unstoppable, and she was just getting started. Family, I want you to really sit with this for a moment. Sloan Barrett walked into a room full of people who'd counted her out and proved, without saying a word, that their judgment meant nothing. She'd been abandoned while pregnant, left to raise 2 children alone, told she wasn't enough. And she took all that pain, all that rejection, all that loss, and she turned it into fuel. Not fuel for revenge, fuel for transformation. She became the woman her younger self needed, the mother her children deserved, the investor that overlooked founders were searching for. She built a billion-dollar empire not to prove Warren wrong, but to prove herself right. That's the lesson here. That's what I need you to understand. Your breakthrough doesn't come from making someone regret losing you. It comes from building a life so magnificent that you stop caring whether they regret it or not. Sloan didn't need Warren's apology. She didn't need his validation. She didn't need him to see what he'd lost. She just needed to see what she'd found. In herself. In her children. In her purpose. That's real power. That's real strength. That's what it looks like to truly move on. So if you're rebuilding after heartbreak, if you're fighting to become who you were meant to be, if you're wondering whether you'll ever feel whole again, listen to me. You will. Not because the person who hurt you will suddenly see your worth, but because you'll build something so beautiful from the broken pieces that their blindness becomes their problem, not yours. Sloan Barrett did it. And so can you. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength, if it gave you hope for your own comeback, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, smash that like button. Show YouTube we want more stories like this. Stories about resilience. About transformation. About people who refuse to let their worst moment define them. Second, subscribe to Mr Hearthline Stories and turn on notifications. Because I've got more testimonies coming. More journeys from broken to brilliant. More proof that your setback is just the setup for your greatest comeback. Third, and this is the most important one, drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what moment in Sloan's story hit you hardest. Tell me about your own comeback. Or just say I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's in their hospital room right now, alone and scared and wondering how they'll make it. Someone who's rebuilding from nothing. Someone who needs to know that the best revenge is living so well that revenge becomes irrelevant. Your story isn't over. Your best chapter might be the one you're about to write. Remember this. Your worth was never determined by who stayed. It's determined by what you build when everyone leaves. Now go build something magnificent. I'm Mr. Hearthline, and I believe in your comeback. I'll see you in the next story.